Welcome to Autism Knows No Borders, a podcast where people connected to autism inspire change and build community. Together with the Global Autism Project, I'm your host, Rachel Harmon, a professional with over a decade of experience in the field of autism services, outreach, and advocacy. This episode is part 2 of my conversation with pioneering autism advocate and internationally recognized leader in animal handling innovations, Dr. Temple Grandin, which was originally released on December 10th, 2020. In this episode, we discuss the spectrum of autism needs, the evolution of diagnostic criteria, Dr. Grandin's opinion on the removal of Asperger's syndrome from the DSM-5, the classification of autism under a single umbrella, the neurodiversity movement, ABA therapy, teaching autism awareness in schools, mental health challenges faced by autistic individuals, and tips for autistic self-advocates, encouraging targeted advocacy and constructive action to make a difference in their communities. In this episode, discover what's possible when different brains come together. And now, I present you Dr. Temple Grandin. In your book, Thinking in Pictures, you said, I believe there is a reason, such as autism, severe manic depression, and schizophrenia remain in our gene pool, even though there is much suffering as a result. Could you elaborate on what you meant by that?
Well, in the milder forms, it gives advantages. You see, a brain can be more thinking, or a brain can be more social, emotional. And at what point do you slap a label on it? And even in animals, you have the animals that are more social, like the lion, for example. Let's take the cat family. So the lions are much more social than the tigers and the panthers and the leopards, which are solitary. There's crossover with autism there. Now, are leopards defective? No. You see, in the milder forms, it's just personality variation. And then what's happening is you're getting more and more kids now. Okay, he's now 7 years old and he's got no friends, so he gets a label put on him. Because at least in the US, you can't get any services without a label.
Yeah.
And then you've got somebody that's nonverbal and they have epilepsy and some other medical problems on top of autism. So you're calling this all the same name. Now, the other thing on the nonverbals, some of them can type independently and they have what's called a locked-in syndrome. Can't control their movements. Vision and hearing is all like the worst internet connection, but they can type independently.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've got this big range that have very, very different needs.
Yeah. And the diagnostic criteria has been changing over the past 60 years. And I know that when you were diagnosed, your doctor described your diagnosis as a form of infantile schizophrenia and the result of cold parenting.
My first diagnosis actually came from a neurologist.
Okay.
And it was minimal brain damage is what it was. And then they used to call autism schizophrenia. But the thing is, schizophrenia and autism are opposites, the brain opposites. That's what's known now. In autism, you tend to get too many circuits built in the back, so you get gigantic memory. But processor speed is slow. A lot of learning differences, it all gets down to processor speed. So if I'm a computer, I'm an Intel 286. You might fun to look that up online, find out what that is. Little tiny processor, but I've got the cloud, okay? Assuming you understand computer terminology, the cloud computing for memory.
Mm-hmm.
So lots of memory, little tiny processor. So attention shifting is a problem, multitasking is a problem. Kid might be slow to respond on speech because of processor speed. You see, and that's one of the symptoms that they have. And autism is just a behavioral profile. And they keep changing it. Did somebody change the diagnosis of tuberculosis? No, they did not. You either got TV or you don't.
Yeah, what do you think of the current label, specifically removing Asperger's syndrome from the DSM-5?
Well, I think it was a gigantic mistake from the standpoint of service providers. Gigantic, huge mistake. Because a child that has no speech delay used to be autistic, you had to have speech delay. Asperger's is socially awkward with no speech delay. And that's now put in with people with a lot more challenges. You see, I've been thinking about it visually.
Mm-hmm.
Think about it verbally. I can understand why they did what they did, but it was a mistake. I remember going to a very fancy, brand new autism school. A lot of nonverbal kids there, both really young and a little bit older. And then there's a 10 or 12-year-old boy, fully verbal, just playing on, looking at bird websites on a laptop. You shouldn't have been there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you see, now that's something, it's a specific example of something I absolutely don't want to see, because I'm seeing too many kids getting held back by the label. And the thing that's interesting, when you go out to the tech companies, they avoid the label. They know they have it, but they avoid the label. Because I see too many kids where autism's becoming their entire identity. No, for me, it was always, livestock editor for the Farm and Ranchman or scientist.
Mm-hmm. Do you identify as Asperger's?
Well, I had a severe speech delay. You see, by definition, Asperger's has to have no obvious speech delay. I was speech delayed till age 4.
Mm.
Now, the thing is, it's all on a continuum. It's a true continuous trait. I've actually had my genome scanned, and I just had a blood sample taken to get it scanned on the latest scanning equipment. And I found out a lot of things about my health. Like, I'm really glad I didn't do tooth implants because my jaw could have fallen apart. I found that out from it. That I have a bleeding disorder, and if I get given too many blood thinners, I might die. I found that out. Very useful information. But when it comes to the autism, you've got so many different genes involved in the brain development that there's no one thing. See, the same genes that make our brain big are the same genes for autism and schizophrenia. There's a paper that's come out called Genomic Trade-Offs. Are autism and schizophrenia the steep price for a human brain? Brain development's a messy thing, and it's a true continuous trait. So you have a little less of the trait when you have Asperger's, with, no speech delay, than when you have speech delay. And then you have individuals never learn to speak, and then you get other people, multiple health problems on top of it. But it's a true continuous trait. They're not going to find, because it's embedded in the genes that make the brain big, hundreds of little tiny code variations. And I'm very happy to find out that, no, I don't have very pretty teeth, but I'm very happy I didn't do tooth implants, because having my jaw fall apart is not something that I'd like. And the genetic test showed that. That was simple genetics. It also showed why I was so anxious. That showed up. That's a simpler trait. And not everybody with autism is anxious. In fact, I've seen that some of the word thinkers tend to be, some of them, less anxious. That's separate from the brain stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That was found out. But no, it's part of normal variation.
Yeah, that kind of goes back to what you were saying about autism remaining in the gene pool for a reason.
Yeah, there's a reason. Because if you took it out, as I said years ago, I said, who do you think made the first stone spear? It wasn't the social yakety-yaks around the campfire in the cave.
Mm-hmm. This
is the problem, and it's a true continuous trait. It's sort of like, you breed 2 breeds of dog together. You can tell which is what mom and dad were for breed. But then you might have something, maybe it's got a quarter German Shepherd, but you can still see a little bit. They mix, and a lot of those traits mix in a real continuous way.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got the Mendelian traits, like, in cattle, for example, you breed a black Angus to a brown and white Hereford, you get a black animal with a white face. Black's dominant. That's Mendelian genetics. Real simple.
What do you think about the future of the science of genetics and being able to potentially alter these kinds of genes that are autism related?
Well, you take those genes out. Well, you better like the computer you've got now, and you better like those headphones, because you'll be no new ones. It's that simple. No new ones.
Mm-hmm.
Who do you think makes this stuff? You've got visual thinkers that are autistic. You've got mathematical thinkers that are autistic. Who do you think programs the computers that this Zoom thing is running on right now? Yeah, there'd be a terrible price if you tried to take it out.
Mm-hmm.
You can make a brain more cognitive and thinking, or make a brain more social. You see, to be really social eats up a ton of processor space in the brain, just eats it up. And so where am I going to put that computing power? Writing code or socializing?
Right. And so as a society on this planet, we need everyone working together.
Well, that's right. And they're doing all kinds of stuff, with genetics. Now, eventually, we'll get to the point where we can just program in genetic code. It's only 4-digit computer code. So the DNA is. It's got 4 ways of putting it together on each rung on the ladder.
Are you excited about that or scared?
Well, I think there's going to be a lot of There's going to be a lot of issues. I don't know. I'm 73 years old. I probably will not be around for that time.
If you could tell people some things to look out for ethically, what would you say?
Well, there's real issues with CRISPR now. That's a gene editing method. And there's a thing called unintended edits. Okay, so let's say I want to let's take a really good use of CRISPR. You can use CRISPR to modify the genetics of cattle, for example. Nobody's doing it now. I want to make it very clear. Nobody's doing it. But this is something that could be done. Okay, it's very painful for cattle to cut off their horns. So I could use CRISPR to snip out the gene that makes horns. Very easy to snip that out. And then they don't grow horns, and I don't have to cut them off. And the reason they cut them off is because they're dangerous. But the problem is, so I snip out the horn gene, there might be another piece of code somewhere in the genome of that animal that's almost the same, and it snips that out. But I don't know what it is, and I don't know what it does. That's what's called an unintended edit. That's a real serious issue.
Yeah, and how will we ever know?
Well, you will be able to know because they'll get enough computer power where they can just proofread the entire genome. Unintended edits. That's what you'd have to do. Have to proofread. On the DNA, you've got the ladders on the DNA, the rungs of the ladder. Every ladder rung would have to be proofread. You'd have to just compare one ladder to the other ladder. And there should only be one edit, the one for the horn gene, not something else. But you'd have to, I think they're working on developing proofreading, but that's something that's a real issue, is that it may snip out another piece of code and you'll have absolutely no idea what it's for or where it is. But but this is something where nobody's done this yet because of the concerns about genetic modification. But that's something that could be done for cattle, because in the dairy cattle it's hard to see. Some breeds of cattle you can breed the horns off, but other breeds of cattle that then I get too narrow a gene pool. Now that's just a real simple example of genetic editing.
Mm-hmm. And applied to humans, I mean, that can be...
Well, they had that case in China, and the doctors have gotten in a lot of trouble for that.
Mm-hmm.
That's a real concern. And the biggest concern is the unintended edits, because see, once you do it, when they did that child, that code's going to get passed on when she has children.
Right.
That's unintended edits is scary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, this leads us into our next set of questions. We have some that were submitted by our listeners, actually. And one of our first listener questions is from Namai Center, who is actually one of our Global Autism Project partners from Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
And they want to know what you think about the neurodiversity movement.
Well, I think it's a good idea, because the thing I'm going to be writing about in my new book is how the different minds complement. And I talked about, on the video conferencing, the visual thinker is going to make the interface. The mathematician is going to make the programming. You need different kinds of minds have complementary skills. And one thing I'm going to be discussing in the new book is Jim Uhl. He's a very interesting guy, another very important mentor, helped get my career started. He'd seen some of my drawings, and he had a little tiny construction company. And he's the guy who built the project shown in the movie. Wonderful guy, Marine Corps captain. And what he was really good at doing, former Marine Corps captain, is putting together diverse teams to get his company started. And he seeked me out to sell jobs and design projects. He actually headhunted me. And then he had a really conventional kind of older businessman that he consulted with. Then he hired another guy that was kind of a wild guy, but he was super good at building things. Guy that a lot of people would not have hired. That was neurodiversity. Mm-hmm. What we have to look at is what you can do. I love what Stephen Hawking says about disability. Right before he died, he was interviewed by the New York Times, and he said, concentrate on the things. Your disability does not prevent you from doing well. And he could do math in his head super well. So that's what he did. And the disability did not affect the math in the head.
Yeah. What do you think about autistic people who are part of the neurodiversity movement and kind of pushing the rest of the world to change for them? Like to change the environment.
Well, yes, and we need to have some quieter workplaces. And that's going to be better for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
These open offices, open plan offices. I have a client that I went and visited their corporate headquarters, and there's no cubicles, and they hate it. Open plan office. I mean, everybody hates it. I don't know how they get any work done in that corporate office. Now with COVID, they haven't been there, but I was just in there last year. I thought their office was awful. Mm-hmm. There's certain, accommodations that I think are going to be good for everybody, just like wheelchair ramps. They're really useful for pushing cargo up, into the building. That's a good thing. But on the other hand, I think there's some things where, like being a filthy, rude, dirty slob, no, we do not have to accommodate that. Eccentric, fine. You want purple hair, fine. Just make sure, it looks nice. There's some things where I'm never going to be the total social butterfly. And I don't like really doing the kind of social chit-chat stuff. But the thing what I feel we got to do is show what we can do. And when I did those dip fat projects, the thing that motivated me is I wanted to prove that I could do it. It wasn't dumb. And when I took that job, I was at the 60% level of competence. I knew the cattle handling, but I had no idea how to do reinforced concrete walls that were in those vats. You better believe it. I got on that phone and I started calling. And I got people to get me the drawings for the reinforced concrete walls. I asked for help. Big mistake that a lot of people make when they get in trouble is they don't ask for help. I asked for help to get the reinforcement rod pattern for those reinforced concrete walls. Mm-hmm. There's people that go to college that are on the spectrum and they trash a course. No, I failed my first math quiz. I got tutoring right away. And I had to be tutored in every math class that I was in. Asked for help the instant I had trouble.
Hey, Rachel here. I'd like to thank one of our listeners, Izzy0826, for reviewing the show on Apple Podcasts. They said, "Thank you for having conversations that will help people grow and think beyond stigmas and misinformation. Thank you for the kind words. 5-star reviews like yours help us to continue spreading autism awareness and acceptance around the world. If, like Izzy, you're finding value in Autism Knows No Borders, please leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. And now, back to the conversation." All right, our next question is from Ann Keys. She's asking how you think autism awareness should be carried out in schools.
Well, one of the things, my third grade teacher, one of my really good teachers, explained to the other children when I was in third grade that I had a disability that was not obvious, like wheelchairs or crutches or being blind, and that the other kids needed to help me, not torture me. That's actually called peer-mediated intervention. Peer-mediated intervention, if you want to look it up. And I have an article I wrote online. It's called How Horses Help the Teenager with Autism Make Friends and Learn How to Work. And I actually have a little bit of literature reviewed on peer-mediated intervention. And when social mistakes are made, you need to explain to them. You can only tell that joke twice, and then you back off. You just can't keep telling the same story over and over again because people get bored with it. You need to be told that. Tell that joke twice, then that's it.
So what do you think about the direction of autism awareness and inclusion today, especially given the history of how far we've come along?
Well, I tend to think in specific examples, and I worked on construction sites and big, huge building projects with people on the spectrum, with dyslexics, with ADHD, worked with them. They were all undiagnosed, and they were very good at what they did. I'm a big believer in making yourself really good at a skill other people want, because my idea of an interview was to lay the drawing on the table. I just showed the drawings. And then now you have some people on the spectrum, they're more the verbal thinkers, and they don't have a fancy skill to show off. And when you try to teach them a job, they take longer to train. But once they're trained, they're really good. One place where people with autism are really good is quality control in spotting mistakes. There's a company that has all autistic people working in it, and they do things like test websites. Let me just give you an example of what they did. This is something as a business person, I'd want this. And this company couldn't figure out why one of the divisions had a 20% drop in sales. Well, the autistic guy checking the website had found that when they updated the website, they changed one digit of the phone number in that division.
Oh,
That cost them a pile of business.
wow.
And then another job that the same company does is you got fancy headphones like what you've got on there. Well, you got to make sure those work with every combination of devices you can think up.
Mm-hmm.
That's all he does and then finds out, well, if I play Netflix and on this type of computer, then the headphones don't work. It's that sort of stuff that you do.
So, what do you think we could be doing as a society?
I think I'm a more bottom-up approach. You're very top-down. Let's make success stories one specific example at a time.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got this person doing this job, they're doing a great job. One, let's start out. People want to reform the whole education system. Let's reform one school at a time and write about it. The thing that's a problem is a lot of people that do a lot of innovative stuff don't write about their stuff. Another reason why it's important that I worked for that magazine is I designed an innovative project and then I wrote about it. Writing was a very important part of my career. So you do something really innovative at a school with inclusion, write about it.
Okay, we have another listener question from Autistic Rainbow 15. And they want to know what your thoughts are about applied behavior analysis or ABA therapy.
Well, there's a lot of old-fashioned ABA therapy that was really terrible, and they just drove people into sensory overload. Now, the thing is, some of the modern ABA, where they're now incorporating sensory stuff into it, there's some good programs for getting language started. The other thing that's a problem with some of the more rigid people in ABA is they don't know when to phase it out. I had some ABA type things used on me, but I was a little kid and it was used to get language started. And then once the language got going, then we just did 50s upbringing, where everybody sat at the table. And if I put my finger in my drink, mother would say, use the spoon. She would just give the instruction. I call that teachable moment. No, but there's some old rigid stuff that was really, really terrible. And there's also stuff that's just stupid, where you've got a fully verbal person and you're still doing ABA. I don't know, that's just stupid.
Yeah, well, ABA in and of itself is just the science of learning.
Well, that's right. But where there was a problem is that there were some people in ABA that didn't believe sensory problems existed, and they were driving people into sensory overload, which is going to be really painful. Good teachers don't do that.
Yeah, and it's caused a lot of trauma for people now who are adults who had gone through it.
Well, yes, and that was terrible. It was absolutely terrible.
Yeah.
And now, people are recognizing the sensory. I was very happy to see a journal article where there'd been a big meta-analysis of a bunch of studies and saying that the sensory integration is an evidence-based treatment. And finally acknowledging sensory problems are real. And when I did my book, Thinking in Pictures, 25 years ago, I have a whole chapter in there where I found, the reports, people on the spectrum had written reports. Sensory is real. And there's now research done with brain scans that shows that loud noise sets off a big network in the brain, and the fear center in the brain's lighting up like fireworks.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't happen in most people. So the fear circuits are getting turned on by sensory stuff. No, this might be my top research priority is therapy for sensory issues, because they really can restrict life.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'm a behavior analyst. I'm a BCBA, and I've seen a lot of success with little kids and even school-aged kids who are talking. We use ABA to help teach them social skills even. Just using the principles of learning and reinforcement to try and increase behaviors that we want to see more of.
Well, if something's working, the thing I always ask parents, I want to make sure little ones, 3-year-olds, 2-year-olds, 4-year-olds, are getting enough hours of one-on-ones with a teacher. That I'll tell them they need to up that if they don't have enough. But, they'll have that about this therapy, that therapy. I mean, the thing I have observed is good teachers just know how to do it. And I'll ask parents, is your child improving? Are you getting more speech, more skills, more turn taking? My speech teacher did lots and lots of turn taking games with me. So I would learn how to wait and learn impulse control, learn how to wait and take a turn.
Yeah, and I've heard you talk about the fact that growing up in the time that you did, in the community that you did, everyone was a teacher for you.
That's the way it was with all the children in the neighborhood. This is just the way it was. And then when kids got to be 7 years old, you'd put on your Sunday best clothes and be little caterers and greeters at your parents' parties. Just taught social skills. I'd go over the next door neighbor's house, and if I stirred my drink with my finger over at the Wood's house, Mrs. Wood would correct me. And she was Mrs. Wood. Wasn't allowed to use her first name. But you see, grown-ups corrected kids, no matter where they were. Like I touched too much stuff in the store, the salespeople would say, don't touch it unless you're going to buy it. Mm-hmm. No, they would give the instruction. That was 50s upbringing in our neighborhood. You see, and that's another reason why Granddaddy ended up getting a job. And most of the grandfathers I talked to would have been the Asperger type, where there was no obvious speech delay. Most of them, not all of them, but most of them would have been.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you think those styles of teaching could be applied now?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that, we had sit-down meals. And these are perfect places to teach social skills. I had to learn how to take turns. I could tell about my day in school, and then my sister had to tell about her day in school. Mother would tell about what she did, and my father would talk about what he did. And you take turns in conversation. That's standard stuff for the 50s.
What about the community part with everyone being on the same page? Like, how can people who live in big cities practice that?
Well, you can still might practice it in one little part of the big cities. My family lives in New York, so of course I'm not going home for Christmas this year because of COVID. But New York has a whole lot of little villages. You kind of get a community right there on a certain block lots of times. You can create it within that community. But the other big problem is so many kids are getting addicted to video games. I was horrified when I found out that 20% or 30% of the kids had never made a paper airplane. That's ridiculous.
Yeah. Okay, our next question is from David Sharif. He's interested in the moment your career really propelled and wants to know how you got to travel the world giving talks about your work.
Well, it started off gradually. Well, the Dipping Vat project shown in the movie was a major big thing that got my career started. And when I was asked to design that, I said, give me 3 weeks, because I knew I had to get the drawings for the concrete reinforcement. I went through that door and I did it. It was gradual. It started off, then I got invited to do a big paper for the International Society for Applied Animal Ethology in 1978. I got invited to Australia to do a talk for the Australian Lot Feeders Association. Those were 2 big things. And then it just kind of gradually grew. And then, of course, when the movie came out, that really increased. Then I was just traveling all the time. But I wasn't doing that all the time. But in the 80s, I would go and spend 3 months on a project, 2 to 3 months on it.
And this is kind of related to the next question from Reciprocated Smile. They want to know how you keep yourself on track and motivated when you're feeling overwhelmed or burnt out.
Well, I do take antidepressant medication, and that's helped me a whole lot of my anxiety. You can read all about that in Thinking in Pictures, a whole chapter about it. And I've been on the medication for 40 years. I got no intention of stopping it. And the mistake made with antidepressants is taking too high a dose. But I had crippling anxiety. And as I went through my 20s, it got worse and worse and worse and worse. And then I remember taking the drug, and there's an old slogan for a company, better living through chemistry. And it just stopped the constant panic attacks. It also helped clear up some stress-related health problems, and it helped some on some of the sensory stuff. But I want to emphasize that it doesn't work for everybody. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is way too many drugs given out to kids. Way too many. Way too many. I was in my early 30s when I went on. My brain was all the way adult developed by that time. And I've seen a lot of visual thinkers that are very anxious. And some, I think, were autistic, some were not. And a little bit of Prozac helped. But the mistake made is giving too high a dose. And the labeled doses are often too high. And you take those labeled doses, those high doses, you'll get agitation and insomnia. It'll be a complete mess. And even though that book's 25 years old, still accurate, because I keep up on all the literature on this.
So, Temple, what motivates you every day?
Well, I figure if I can do some things where, when someone just sent me a nice email saying I really inspired her to succeed, that makes my day. If the things I do can improve something, that, okay, we're doing this podcast right now, And if this helps somebody, and I understand we're going to a lot of different countries, and this helps somebody out there to be, get a good career or helps a kid to do better in school, have a better life, then I've done something of value. That's kind of how I look at it.
We actually have a special thank you from one of our listeners, the Potato Witch, and they want you to know that reading your books when they were 9 years old and undiagnosed helped them cope with what they were going through.
Well, good. That's super good, because the thing is it gives a lot of insight when you learn that the way you think is different.
Yeah.
And I have a book called Different, Not Less, and it's 16 people diagnosed later in life, mostly Asperger type, all employed, diagnosed later in life, older people. And where the diagnosis helped them was with their relationships, because now they understood why they weren't getting along with their spouse or whatever. And that's where that can be helpful. And just reading some of their stories, and I edited that book, I got insight from it too.
Mm-hmm. All right, Temple, I'd like to close with one last question. What advice would you give to young adults with autism who are now embarking on their journeys of advocacy work?
Well, I think we need to demonstrate on what people can do. Like this really positive company that's Spiritech, that's the name, Spiritech. It's like testing the fancy headphones, testing websites for problems. And they're extremely good at this. The Israelis are using people with autism to analyze satellite photos. They are extremely good at this. I would really emphasize a lot of those kind of things. Let's show what you can do. This gets back to Stephen Hawking, to emphasize the things your disability doesn't prevent you from doing well. These are things that emphasize. Then there's the whole problem of people with the very severe challenges, nonverbal, getting abused by caretakers. I'm right now doing some consulting with an agency that's working on how do we deal with they might be in somewhere where their caretakers are abusing them. See, now that's a totally different kind of advocacy. And she's working on how do you advocate for somebody where they've taken away all the communication and they can't tell people they're getting abused. This is where the spectrum with the word autism is not such a broad range, that the type of advocacy that this person's doing is totally different than something I might talk about employment, where it's a guy that looks at satellite photos or programs computers that we're using right now. There's probably a lot of autism program the computer we're on right now.
Mm-hmm.
You see, this is the problem. And one end requires a different advocacy than the other end. So you might want to pick out which one you want to concentrate on. And I've been helping this agency to figure out how to advocate for people that can't communicate. Well, and what I suggested is we have to advocate that there are people in homes that have either autism or some other very severe disability that are being abused. We have to explain to the public that that happens.
Mm-hmm. And just a follow-up question on that, what advice would you give to some of these autistic young adults who now have made their identity their autism, like what you were saying before?
Well, do something constructive with it. That's what I would suggest. Do the right kind of advocacy. Now, one thing about advocacy, I don't care if it's autism or it's in the animal field. You want to make sure that the things you advocate for do good things in the field. In other words, get out of the office and find out what's going on with people working in the field. And I'll say that for animal stuff, autism stuff, food safety stuff, I don't care what it is. Unfortunately, sometimes you've got people advocating and, sitting in offices and they advocate for some law and it has an unintended bad consequence out in the field. I've seen that happen. So find out what's really going on the front lines. It doesn't matter what it is that you're advocating. And the other thing is pick out something relatively targeted where you'll be more effective. It's sort of like someone says, well, we got to reform the entire educational system. Well, where would you start? Let's start out. Maybe we need to demonstrate again that an art class and some hands-on classes really help the students. And then I'm going to tell them about this study, that a Nobel Prize winner was much more likely to have a creative hobby than just a regular scientist. That's an actual study. Tell people about that sort of stuff. But figure out something relatively specific. Like, okay, adults with severe disabilities of various types that are getting abused. Okay, that's something relatively targeted that this agency's working on.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to worry about the programmers out in Silicon Valley. And where they may need to learn more about autism is on their marriages. That's where they will need it. But it's sort of like, it'd be pretty hard to work on both of those at the same time.
Yeah, you'd be spreading yourself too thin.
You're spread so thin you can't do anything. I remember years ago seeing a charity, Save the Children Foundation, that said, don't try to save the whole world, just save a piece of it. And you donate money to one little child and you'd get letters from them. Or there's a Smile Foundation where they fix cleft palates on children that would normally not have them fixed. You see, now it's something targeted. Doctors Without Borders, they're doing something. You're not just all over the place. There's a tendency to get way too top down and go, oh, what are we going to do about inclusion? Well, get a little more targeted in a specific area. You will be more effective.
Yeah. That's actually our model at the Global Autism Project, because we partner with autism centers around the world and we work from the ground up and we train their local staff.
That's right.
Because if you look at it from this aerial view of we need to make sure all the kids in the world have access to services, it becomes too daunting of a task.
Well, you don't even know where to start. You see, this is the problem.
Yeah.
And the other thing, write about what you did. And I never wrote about it abstractly. Well, here's the drawings for the corrals. And people used to say, why do you give it away? I give it away because I wanted to make change. I wanted to make improvements. Let's say you went to a really impoverished area and you started a good school for kids that really worked, and it worked really economically. Write about how you did it, how you did it with the resources in the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
What you could do in a lot of these places is have retired mechanics teach kids car mechanics. How did you do it in the neighborhood? And write about it. And put up a website that's real information rich. I did it on livestock. My autism website's got lots of information on it. And my livestock website's got information. Yes, I do sell books. I do that. But I've got lots of free information out there. And some of it's the same as what's in some of the books. I explain to people how to do things.
Yeah, you're sharing your wisdom.
As a visual thinker, I see stuff. Schools I thought were really terrible and some that I thought were really good. And pick out something you can advocate about where you can see something real happening.
Mm-hmm. That's great advice. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate you sharing your ideas with us.
Well, I want to see people get out there and, do everything that they can do and figure out how to make things better.
Yeah.
Oh, and the other thing I'll suggest, you want to advocate about something specific, leave the politics out of it.
Mm.
You'll be a lot more effective. You basically have to decide what you want to do. Be a little more targeted.
Yeah. Okay, Temple. Well, thank you.
It's been great talking to you, and thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning in to Autism Knows No Borders. This conversation with Dr. Grandin left me feeling inspired, curious, and motivated. I'm inspired by her commitment to ensuring that all animals are treated with compassion at every stage of their lives. How can we apply this mindset to our fellow humans and encourage a shift from ableist views and exclusive environments? I'm curious about how fundamentally different minds can work together on various projects. How can we empower our neurodiverse colleagues to identify and advocate for their needs when working on a team? Lastly, I'm motivated by Dr. Grandin's advice to target our work and build upwards. How can we focus our efforts to create significant change? With this podcast, our aim is to transform how people relate to autism, one story at a time. We hope that by bringing you stories of breakthroughs amidst challenges and highlighting beauty in our differences, you'll feel inspired to make a difference in your own community, whether it's through a conversation with someone you know or in the way you treat your neighbor. Thanks for tuning in to Autism Knows No Borders. If you enjoy this podcast and you'd like to support our mission, please take a moment to rate the show and leave a review. You'll be helping us to continue spreading autism awareness and acceptance around the world. Thanks for listening. Take care.